Today we will be discussing the 27th chapter from Canto 3. In the previous chapter, we saw. Prabhu, can you move to the next slide?
Okay, one second.
Yeah, the next one. Okay. So in the previous chapters, we saw, Kapila Muni was explaining. He's explaining the essential teachings of Sankhya Yoga, and especially in the previous chapter, we discussed at the end. Kapila Muni recommends to Devahuti that only through devotion, detachment, and advancement in spiritual knowledge acquired through concentrated devotional service, one should contemplate on the super soul as present in this very body, although simultaneously apart from it. And Srila Prabhupada so beautifully explains that as long as the mind is distracted, it is very difficult to concentrate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So one should therefore, follow detachment from the material world and situate oneself in knowledge. And then one will be able to understand the absolute truth. So that was his recommendation from the previous chapter. Prabhu, go back to the previous slide. So now we'll see a overview of what we will be discussing in this chapter today. So there are totally 30 verses. The first 9 verses, Kapila Muni explains about the different practices to attain liberation, and then text 10 to 16, he talks about the awareness of a liberated soul. And from verse 70 to 20, we see Devahuti asks, further questions to Kapila Dev, and then the rest of the verses, Kapila Muni actually replies to those questions. Prabhu, next verse, slide. Okay. So in the first 4 verses, the Lord Kapila Dev actually explains what are the different causes for the soul transmigration from one body to another body. So he says, for a person, because in the previous chapter he ended by saying that those who can, can follow detachment and can situate themselves in knowledge and practice devotional service, those persons, even though they are in this material world, they still will not be affected, or they'll be unaffected by the modes of material nature. And that is what he is explaining in the first verse. He says, when the living entity is thus unaffected by the modes of material nature because he is changing and does not claim proprietorship, he remains apart from the reactions of modes, although abiding in a material body, just as the sun remains aloof from its reflection on water. And Srila Prabhupada so beautifully explains the simile here. He says that when a sun is reflected on the water, any movement caused to the water will not affect the sun, right? And similarly, the sun is many millions of miles away from the water. So similarly, so the sun is not affected. So similarly, even though a devotee appears to be in the material world, when he is situated in the platform of devotional service, he is also unaffected because of the process of the bhakti yoga that he is practicing. He is nirguna, or he is unaffected by the qualities of the material nature. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada also explains that how this term avikara means without change, right? So, and he says the original position is one of rendering service to the Lord. When one becomes detached from material attraction and engages fully in devotional service, that is called changelessness. So we are actually, our constitutional position is that of avikara. We are changeless, but because we are situated, ourselves with doing material activities, that's when we are affected by the modes of material nature. Otherwise, we are in a we are in the state without change. Then in the next two verses he talks about the, the process of uh, being conditioned, and how, and what causes the soul to actually transmigrate from one body to another. So in the verse 2 he says, when the soul is under the spell of material nature and false ego, identifying his body as the self, he becomes absorbed in material activities, and by the influence of false ego he thinks that he is the proprietor of everything. So here Prabhupada explains so nicely that how, Arjuna, he was trying, prior to Krishna speaking the Bhagavad Gita, he was actually trying to accept the responsibility for killing, his grandfathers and cousins and teachers in the fight. But he became freed from that proprietorship of action when he acted under the direction of Krishna. So this is the difference between liberation and conditioning. So a conditioned soul, even though he may be acting in the mode of goodness, still he is conditioned under the spell of material nature. Whereas a devotee, even though he'll be doing the same material activities, because he's acting completely under the direction of the Lord, he is not, the Lord actually takes the responsibility for those actions. So he has no responsibility because he's acting under the direction of the Lord. So that's the difference between liberation and conditioning. The activities are the same, but the consciousness or the activities for a devotee, the activity is dedicated to the Lord. For a person, otherwise he is just doing it for his own satisfaction. In the next verse 3, Kapila Muni further explains, the reaction to, acting under false ego. He says, the conditioned soul therefore transmigrates into different species of life, higher and lower, because of his association with the modes of material nature. Unless he is relieved of material activities, he has to accept this position because of his faulty work. And Prabhupada explains what is his faulty work. He says, it's called karma doshai. This refers to any activity, good or bad, performed in this material world. They are all contaminated because of the association with the material nature. So he says that as long as we are, doing this, engaged in this faulty activities, there is no release from the material world, and the term is called samsara padavi. Samsara padavi means as long as we are, we do not cease to perform these faulty activities, we have to take birth, we will have repeated birth and death and keep changing bodies. Sometimes it's a higher body, sometimes we take birth in lower species. This is called samsara padavi. So one who desires to get liberated from this material world should actually turn his activities towards devotional service. As long as we are, not performing devotional service, we have to take birth again and again. Sometimes, higher, and sometimes in lower species. There is, and Prabhupada says there is no other alternative. And then still in further, verse 4, he explains, actually a living entity is transcendental to material existence. But because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, this material existential condition does not cease. And just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages. And Prabhupada explains very nicely the example of a dream. He says, due to different mental conditions in dreams, we are put into advantageous and disadvantageous positions. Similarly, the spirit soul has nothing to do with this material nature, but because of this mentality of lording it over, he is put into the position of conditional existence. I really like the word conditional existence. And then further, in the purport, he explains that unless we understand, we come to an understanding that Krishna is our real friend, which is like, similar to what Srila Prabhupada explains in, chapter 5, verse 29, the peace formula, in Bhagavad Gita, he says, unless one comes to an understanding or raises one's consciousness to the platform of understanding that Krishna is actually my friend, my true friend, he is the supreme, benefactor, controller, and proprietor, only then we will be able to be relieved from this conditional existence. So, and he also says, Prabhupada says, one should not only, as a devotee, one should not only understand, this basic fact, but we should also actually propagate this knowledge to everybody else. So that's why he says the best service to people in general is to awaken them to Krishna consciousness, so that they may know that the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend is Krishna. Then this illusory dream of lording it over material nature will vanish, because we have been conditioned for several unlimited years into thinking, into enjoying, or thinking about considering oneself to be the Lord and thinking about our own enjoyment, that unless we come out of that platform and understand that Krishna is our true friend, he is the supreme proprietor controller, then we will be able to come out of this illusion. Can you go to the next slide, Prabhu? Okay, text 5. In text 5, he explains about what the Sankhya process for attaining freedom from this conditional existence. He says, it is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus, his mind and consciousness will be under full control. So now he is giving the actual formula, to attain freedom from this conditional existence. He says one should be engaged in serious devotional service with detachment. By doing this, one will be able to bring his mind under full control. And Prabhupada nicely explains the process of liberation in this verse. He says, the cause of one's becoming conditioned by material nature is because of his thinking himself to be the enjoyer, the proprietor, and the friend of all living entities. This false thinking is a result of contemplation on sense enjoyment. When one thinks that he is the best friend to his countrymen, to society, to humanity, and all that, he starts engaging in various nationalistic and philanthropic activities. So, but by doing so, even though it appears to be serving everyone, he's actually in actuality only serving his own senses, and that is a fact. So he's saying, but the basic principle of bhakti yoga, as he said, is to be convinced of three principles. He says one should always think that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. So if one can be convinced of this fact, then one will not be actually serving the senses, but rather dovetail his activities towards serving Krishna. And then he says, as soon as one engages in serious devotional service of the Lord, naturally the propensity to, think that we are the enjoyer goes away. It disappears. So that's why it's so important to be situated in knowledge of the Lord. Because once, the knowledge comes in, automatically, the consciousness, helps us to do the right things. So, and then in the last paragraph, in the last part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that one particular point mentioned in this verse is very significant. He says, it is said here, prasaktam asatam pati. The mind is always attracted by asat, the temporary, the material existence. Because we have been associated with material nature since time immemorial, we have been accustomed to our attachment to this temporary material nature. So what can we do in order to, come out of this propensity? He says the mind has to be fixed at the eternal lotus feet of the Lord. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayu. One has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna, then everything will be very nice. Thus the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is stressed in this verse. So we also know the example of Ambarish Maharaj, how he, dovetailed all his activities towards engaging in Krishna conscious activities. So if we can also nicely, dovetail all our senses and activities in Krishna consciousness, then it will be easy for us to, fix our mind on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Once we do that, of course, with detachment, then it is easy to actually, get out of this material conditioning. Let's go to the next verse. Can I see the
Vishaka? Sorry, we lost connection. The other computer, Govinchan is just setting it up.
Okay, let me. Okay, in text 6, we see that now Kapila Dev is actually, he has given the formula, right? The formula is engage in serious devotional service with detachment. Now he's saying in text 6, how can we purify our mind to accomplish this, right? one thing is to, of course, as I said, to engage all our, dovetail all our activities in Krishna consciousness. But in text 6, particularly, he says one has to become faithful by practicing the controlling process of the yoga system and must elevate himself to the platform of unalloyed devotional service by chanting and hearing about me. So that is the formula he is giving here.
Vishaka, he just put it up.
Oh, okay. Okay. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that, he says Bhakti Yoga is direct and the other process is indirect. Of course, here we see that Kapila Muni is actually explaining the Sankhya process, and in every purport, Srila Prabhupada, so nicely explains that it's the same as Bhakti Yoga, and it's very simple. It's very straightforward and simple. So he says Bhakti Yoga is direct and the other process is indirect. But even if the indirect process is taken, there is no success unless one comes fully to the direct process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. He says that's the starting point. So, first there is faith, and then in order to develop the faith, we actually have to, the first and foremost thing to do is to chant and hear about the Lord. So whatever process, whether Bhakti Yoga or Sankhya Yoga, one can come to the platform of devotional service only by hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord. Therefore, the word Satyena is used here. In this connection, Swami Sridhara comments that Satyena means Nishkapatena, without duplicity. The impersonalists are full of duplicity. Sometimes they pretend to execute devotional service, but their ultimate idea is to become one with the Supreme. And he says this is duplicity, and Bhagavatam does not allow this duplicity, because we saw in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, it states that Paramo Nirmatsarana, the treatise Srimad Bhagavatam is meant only for those who are completely free from envy. So the same point is stressed again here. Unless one is completely faithful to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages himself in the process of hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, there is no possibility of liberation, right? So Srila Prabhupada is nicely stressing the importance of hearing and chanting in this verse. We'll go to the next verse. Next slide, please. Okay, so from text 7 to 9, Kapila Muni is actually giving the preliminary rules and regulations for this process. He's actually instructing, he's giving a guide to yoga practitioners on the preliminary rules and regulations. So he says in verse 7, in executing devotional service, one has to see every living entity equally, without enmity towards anyone, yet without intimate connections with anyone. One has to observe celibacy, be grave, and execute his eternal activities, offering the results to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then in the next verses, he says that for his income, a devotee should be satisfied with what he earns without difficulty. He should not eat more than what is necessary. He should live in a secluded place and always be thoughtful, peaceful, friendly, compassionate, and self-realized. So in verses 7 to 9, he's actually giving these different rules and regulations. So by following these preliminary rules and regulations, of Sankhya Yoga, it further purifies the practitioner. It will help him by doing these activities. It will help the practitioner to develop detachment born of the mode of goodness. Once he is purified, by practicing these regulations, he can then advance towards the next level of actually meditating on the super soul, which is what will be explained in detail in chapter 28. And we'll see here that how, as I explained, Srila Prabhupada is taking each of these verses and he is actually relating that with what a Bhakti Yogi does, right? Like for example, in the purport to text 8, Srila Prabhupada says that, like how Kapila Muni is prescribing this regulation of living in a secluded place, he explains the same principles Same principle as how a bhakti yoga would apply it by saying the next item recommended is that a devotee should live in a secluded place. Generally, a common man is interested in pounds, shillings, and pence, or materialistic advancement in life, which is unnecessary for a devotee. A devotee should select a place of residence where everyone is interested in devotional service. Generally, therefore, a devotee goes to a sacred place of pilgrimage where devotees live. It is recommended that he live in a place where there is no large number of ordinary men. It is very important to live in a secluded place. That's how he is. Srila Prabhupada is giving, is asking us to relate to these rules and regulations. Because if you see a yogi, he will go to a secluded place where there is nobody and then try to, meditate. But for us, Srila Prabhupada has always emphasized that we should be doing, our activities in association of devotees. That is more risk-free and will actually keep us, hold us in, in the right position. So that's one example of how Srila Prabhupada, is writing in the purport. He's explaining how a bhakti yogi would relate to these rules and regulations. And then, if you go to the verse 9, he's further explaining that one's seeing power should be increased through knowledge of spirit and matter, and one should not unnecessarily identify himself with the body and thus become attracted by bodily relationships. So whatever practices we are doing in our sadhana bhakti, it is the same as the effects that one would derive from doing Sankhya practices, but bhakti yoga is more direct and it is simple and is joyful. So we'll now go to the next section. Next slide, Prabhu. So we see that text 10 to 17, Kapila Muni further explains about the awareness of a liberated soul. So in text 10, he says, one should be situated in the transcendental position beyond the stages of material consciousness and should be aloof from all other conceptions of life. Thus, realizing freedom from false ego, one should see his own self just as he sees the sun in the sky. So, by practicing Sankhya Yoga, one should step through the door of liberation and enter transcendence. One's awareness fixed beyond the material consciousness. So, here, Prabhupada is explaining in the purport that consciousness acts in 3 stages under material conception of life. He says, when we are awake, consciousness acts in a particular way. Then we are asleep, it acts in a different way. And when we are in deep sleep, consciousness acts in still another way. To become Krishna conscious, one has to become transcendental to all these 3 stages. Our present consciousness should be freed from all perceptions of life other than consciousness of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He says, this is called Duri Bhutanya Darshanaha, which means that when one attains perfect Krishna consciousness, he does not see anything but Krishna. And then he explains, how this is, he says about the sun, right? He says this is confirmed here. One should be freed from all other vision, and in that way he is freed from false egoistic identification and sees himself as the eternal servitor of the Lord. Then he says Chaksus Sevarkam. As we can see the sun without a doubt, one is fully developed in Krishna consciousness, sees Krishna and his energy. By this vision, one becomes Atmadrik or self-realized. And then he says the senses should be purified. The real service of the Lord begins only when the senses are purified. So he says one does not have to stop the activities like how it is recommended by the impersonalists, but one should only remove the false ego of identifying with the body. We should still be we'll still be continuing with the activities that we perform. Only is we become detached. We remove this false conception of identifying with the body. Then what happens? The senses automatically become purified. You don't have to do anything, separately, like how it is recommended, by other processes to actually detach from material activities and stuff like that. All we do is just remove the false ego, of identifying with the body, and then automatically senses are purified, and one, will be discharging devotional service. And with this purified senses, one can actually discharge devotional service. So yeah, when the false ego is removed, we actually have purified consciousness. Verse 11. And then Srila Prabhupada explains this. Oh, not sure what. Okay. Let me. I think I forgot to put the content for 11 here. Anyway, so Srila Prabhupada explains this vision further in his purport to text 11. He says, a pure devotee can see the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everything materially manifested. He is present there only as a reflection, but a pure devotee can realize that in the darkness of material illusion, the only light is the Supreme Lord, who is its support. So here you see that the translation says a liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection even in the false ego. He is the support of the material cause and he enters into everything. He is absolute, one without a second, and he is the eyes of the illusory energy. So the point is, a pure devotee sees, can feel or sees the presence of the Supreme Lord in everything materially manifested. That's why he's even able to see, Krishna manifest as a reflection even in one's false ego. Including, okay. And then he gives an example for this in the next verse. He says, Prabhu, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Here he says the presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on the water and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun itself is situated in the sky. So the sun is, as I explained, it's many millions of miles away from the surface of the earth, but still its reflection can be seen up in the pot of a water in a corner of a room. Similarly, the room is dark and the sun is, far away. But once the sun rises, the sun's reflection on the water actually illuminates the darkness of the room, right? So similarly, a pure devotee can realize the presence of the Supreme Lord in everything by the reflection of his energy. Okay. And then in the purport to text 13, we see that Srila Prabhupada is explaining this fact from verse 12. He's explaining it further in the purport of verse 13. He says, by the understanding of the pure soul called Satyadrik, one can see everything as a reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A concrete example can be given in this connection. And then he gives another example. He says, a conditioned soul sees a very beautiful rose, and he thinks that such nice aromatic flower should be used for his own sense gratification. This is one kind of vision. A liberated soul, however, sees the same flower as a reflection of the Supreme Lord. He thinks, oh, this beautiful flower is made possible by the superior energy of the Lord. Therefore, it belongs to the Supreme Lord and should be utilized in his service. So these are the two kinds of vision. So the conditioned soul sees the flower for his own enjoyment, and the devotee sees the same flower as an object to be used in the service of the Lord. In the same way, one can see the reflection of the Supreme Lord in one's own senses, mind and body, and in everything. And that's what we see, right? If we read the chapters 10 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains, I am this, I am that, I am this. So that's the vision that a devotee has. When he sees anything, he actually relates it to as the energy of the Lord. Whereas a person who is not in that consciousness sees everything as an object for his own satisfaction. So everything is seen as Krishna's energy, and Krishna is in the devotees even see Krishna being reflected in matter. Now, next verse 14. Kapila Muni now moves, from a pure soul's realization of the ultimate nature of the universe to his relationship with the material body. Okay, now he's in this verse. It explains, although a devotee appears to be merged in the 5 material elements, the objects of material enjoyment, the material senses, and material mind and intelligence, is understood to be awake and to be freed from the false ego. This is very interesting. Here, although the pure soul is superficially, it appears to be engaged in matter or merged in matter, he is actually free from false material identification, and therefore is awake to his actual eternal and individual identity. So if you see the purport, it says, Prabhupada explains that the explanation of by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of how a person can be liberated even in this body is more elaborately explained in this verse. And then he says, the Mayavadi philosophers, no, wait one second. It says, the living entity who has become Satyadrik, who realizes his position in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, may remain apparently merged in the five elements of matter, the five material sense objects, the 10 senses, mind and intelligence, but still he is considered to be awake and to be freed from the reaction of false ego. Here the word Leena is very significant. He says the Mayavadi philosophers recommend merging into the impersonal effulgence of Brahman, which is their ultimate goal. But that merging is also mentioned here. But in spite of merging, one can keep his individuality. And the example of the Jiva Goswami explains that how a green bird enters into a tree. It appears to be, to merge in the color of greenness, but still the bird does not lose its individuality. So similarly, a living entity, even though he appears to be merged in the material nature or in the spiritual nature, he does not give up his individuality. So whether we are in this material world or spiritual world, we do not lose our real individuality. And what is the real individuality is to understand oneself to be the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. And then Prabhupada in the last part of the purport explains, but even while merged in the 24 elements of matter, he can keep his individuality as eternal servitor of the Lord, either in the spiritual nature or in the material nature. Such a servitor is considered to be a liberated soul. That is the explanation of the authorities, and it is confirmed in this verse. So yeah, so through these verses, Kapila Muni is actually explaining the awareness of a liberated soul. This is what a liberated soul understands about his own identity. So next in verse 15, we see that the living entity can vividly feel his existence as a seer, but because of the disappearance of the ego during the state of deep sleep, he falsely takes himself to be lost, like a man who has lost his fortune and feels distressed, thinking himself to be lost. It's also again very interesting. Prabhupada, the purports are very self-explanatory. In this chapter, it's very straightforward. It's very interesting. So Prabhupada explains, only in ignorance does a living entity think that he is lost. If by attainment of knowledge he comes to the real position of his eternal existence, he knows that he is not lost. So it's just a change of consciousness. An appropriate example is mentioned here. Nasta Vitta Ivaturaha. A person who has lost a great sum of money may think that he is lost, but actually he is not lost, only his money is lost. But due to his absorption in the money or identification with the money, he thinks that he is lost. Similarly, when we falsely identify with matter as our field of activities, we think that we are lost. Actually we are not lost. As soon as a person is awakened to the pure knowledge of understanding that he is the eternal servitor of the Lord, his own real position is revived. A living entity can never be lost. So he only appears to be, forgetting his real identity as if put in a deep sleep. But the moment he actually awakens his consciousness, to the real knowledge, then immediately he understands, his actual identity. His actual identity is always intact. So it's just a matter of, advancing in transcendental knowledge and realizing our real identity. So once that consciousness awakens, then it's just like turning on a switch and turning it off. And that's what Srila Prabhupada says. Once you get this knowledge, don't just keep it to yourself, but actually the best service is to give to people, because it's a very simple process, a very straightforward process. If people can be given this knowledge, can be educated about what is their actual identity, then immediately they'll be able to act their identity. I mean, they'll be able to realize their real identity, and they'll be able to immediately.
Vishaka Mataji, sorry to disturb you, but can you close the door to the room, Mataji? There's too much of noise in the background.
It's actually closed. Let me ask him to stop for a moment.
think Vrindavan is practicing for his Mridanga class. Normally he doesn't do. He choose to do today.
Sorry, Prabhu.
That's fine, Mataji.
Yeah. Okay. So, verse 16. Okay. Then in verse 16, Kapila Muni explains, when by mature understanding one can realize his individuality, then the situation he accepts under the false ego becomes manifest to him. So here Srila Prabhupada explains that when the living entity is purified of this, false ego, then he takes everything in the right perspective, and that is the state of the liberation. Later in the same purport, he explains that that the living entity's mature understanding is that Krishna. So this mature understanding, by mature understanding, it means that the living entity understands that I am not the enjoyer, but Krishna is the enjoyer, and I'm meant to be enjoyed by Krishna. Once this mature understanding comes, then the living entity actually becomes liberated. So this this state of consciousness of knowing that Krishna is the real enjoyer and I am a servitor, then one actually is in a liberated state. That is what is called real liberation, being fixed in one's natural position as a servant of Krishna. Bro, 1 second, let me remind him one more time. Sorry if it's are you still able to hear the background noise?
Yes, a little bit, but it's lesser than before. But yes, Mataji. But I don't know if others are okay. Then we can continue. But
okay, let me give him one more reminder, Prabhu.
Okay, fair enough.
Normally they ask him so many times to practice on a Sunday. He never practices. Today he's so enthusiastic.
I think he wants to provide a background like how Vaisheshika Prabhu plays his tambura, right?
Yeah. Okay. Can you go to the next slide, Prabhu?
17th verse.
Okay. Here, so from verse 17 to 20, we see that after explaining all these things, Mother Devahuti has further questions that she asks Kapila Dev. So, Sri Devahuti inquired, my dear Brahmana, does material nature ever give release to the spirit soul? Since one is attracted to the other eternally, how is that separation possible?
I'm not taking my pacifier.
Sorry, Prabhu.
No, that's okay.
So she's asking.
Mataji, we can take a break if you need to do something to take care of her.
No,
you can
Prabhu is there to take care of. Yeah. So now she's asking, because Mother Devati, after hearing all these things, looks like she's not, she's not convinced that, she has this doubt. Oh, is it really possible? Even though it sounds easy, that it's just like switching consciousness. She's having this doubt that is it possible for the spirit soul to really get released, from this material nature? Because they seem the spirit soul seems to be so so much attracted to the material nature. How is the separation possible, or how can what are the practical ways to for a soul to get released from this material nature? So that is her first inquiry. And then further she says in verse 18, as there is no separate existence of the earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste, there cannot be any separate existence of intelligence and consciousness. So she looks like she is like not convinced at all. So that's why she is saying that, and she's giving this example of how there is no, separation. If you take, taste out of water, what is the use of water, right? So similarly, I mean, the water is known by its taste. The fire is identified by its heat. So if that is removed, the heat element is removed from the fire, I mean, is it even possible? So that's why she's asking this question by giving examples. So that's what Prabhupada says. The example is given here that anything material has an aroma. The flower, the earth, everything has an aroma. If the aroma is separated from the matter cannot be identified. There is no taste to water, the water has no meaning. If there is no heat in the fire has no meaning. Similarly, when there is want of intelligence, spirit has no meaning. And then further she asks, hence even though he is the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as long as the material nature acts on him and binds him? Because in the previous verses, in the beginning of the chapter, Kapila Muni did explain that he gave this example of how even though a devotee is actually acting under the modes of material nature, because he is detached and he is performing his activities for Krishna, he is not bound by this material nature. But she is still asking, she's still asking, how is it be possible? How can there be freedom for the soul? Even though he's acting under the modes of material nature. So here Prabhupada says, since Devahuti is gradually coming to the point of surrender, her questions are very intelligent. How can one be liberated? How can one be in a pure state of spiritual existence as long as he is strongly held by the modes of material nature? This is also an indication to the false meditator. There are so many meditators who think, I am the supreme spirit soul, I am conducting the activities of material nature, and under my direction the sun is moving and moon is rising. So they think about all these different contemplations. But it is seen that just 3 minutes after finishing such nonsensical meditation, they are immediately captured by the modes of material nature. So as Prabhupada explains, Devahuti is asking these questions so that she can hear from Kapila Dev that the only solution is to actually surrender to the Lord. So that's why Prabhupada is appreciating. She's saying that he's saying that her questions are very intelligent. Actually, unless a living entity surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead as instructed in the Bhagavad Gita, there is no liberation or freedom from the clutches of Maya. So in the previous verses, he just gave like a little dose, and he wanted, so that Devahuti will ask further, like how in the Bhagavad Gita, the whole conversation between Krishna and Arjuna is Krishna gives a dose and then Arjuna further asks questions so that Krishna can reveal the entire knowledge. So we see a similar kind of conversation going on here. Then in verse 20, she further says, even if the great fear of bondage is avoided by mental speculation and inquiry into the fundamental principles, it may still appear again, since its cause is not ceased. So it says, even though even if we she says, even if I agree that I can get freedom from this bondage, what if it appears again? What if the root cause reappears and forces me to be bound again by these material energy? So that's her last question. So now we will go to the last section, the last 10 verses, where Kapila Muni actually responds to all these intelligent questions asked by Mother Devahuti. So we see that what was the first question? Our first question was, how do we what was the first? Can you go to the previous slide, Prabhu? The first question asked by her is, how can the soul gain release from material nature? And this is what is explained in verse 21. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. So it's a very straightforward answer that he gives. And Prabhupada explains, one can be liberated from all adverse circumstances simply by seriously engaging in devotional service. How this devotional service develops and matures is actually explained here. He says, in the beginning, one has to perform his prescribed duties with a clean mind. Clean consciousness means Krishna consciousness. One has to perform his prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. There is no necessity for changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness, similar to what we hear Krishna tell Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. In discharging Krishna conscious duties, one should determine whether by his professional or occupational duties, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is satisfied. In another place in Bhagavatam, it is said, Svanutishtasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. Everyone has prescribed duties to perform, but the perfection of such duties will be reached only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is satisfied by such actions. For example, Arjuna's prescribed duty was to fight, and the perfection of his fighting was tested by the satisfaction of Krishna. Krishna wanted him to fight, and when he fought for the satisfaction of the Lord, that was the perfection of his professional devotional duty. On the other hand, when contrary to the wish of Krishna, he was not willing to fight, that was imperfect. So even while discharging our devotional service, we need to know what to do that will please Krishna. So we cannot do it according to our own whimsical mind, but that's why there is Guru, Sadhu and Shastra to guide us, so that whatever we are doing, we actually do it right, we do it properly. So when we have these instructions from Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, and we act according to it, then we can be assured that our activities are actually pleasing the Lord, or it's in line with Krishna's will. And in the last part of the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains there are two kinds of Shruti or scriptures. One is spoken by the Lord, another is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. And he says Bhagavad Gita is the former and Srimad Bhagavatam is the latter. One must hear these scriptures repeatedly from reliable source in order to become fixed in serious devotional service. Through engagement in such devotional service, one becomes freed from the contamination of Maya. It is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam that hearing about the Supreme Personality of God, it cleanses the heart of all contamination caused by the influence of three modes of material nature. We read, we have read these verses in the first canto. By continuous regular hearing, the effects of all of the contamination of lust and greed to enjoy and lord it over the material nature, they all gradually diminish, and then once all these qualities diminish, then one becomes situated in the mode of goodness, and this is the stage of Brahman realization. In this way, one becomes fixed on the transcendental platform, and remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. So how nicely we see Srila Prabhupada is so consistent, with what it is, explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, and again, we hear in this chapter that how it is so important to hear and chant the glories of the Lord. By doing so, all the impurities within the heart will actually gradually diminish. And thanks to Shivas Prabhu for giving us, for bringing us all together to actually follow this instruction. Because without Bhakti Vaibhav, I don't think I would have, read Srimad Bhagavatam seriously. So it's a very, very important activity that we are doing, and we should, as Prabhupada says, we should take repeated instructions from these scriptures and connect our life in according to that. Okay, next verse. Kapila Muni further explains, this devotional service has to be performed strongly in perfect knowledge and with transcendental vision. One must be strongly renounced and must engage in austerity and perform mystic yoga in order to be firmly fixed in self-absorption. Of course, he's giving the Sankhya process, and as usual, Srila Prabhupada is giving the process for the Bhakti yogis. He says, devotional service in Krishna consciousness cannot be performed blindly, as I said, explained before, due to material emotion or mental concoction. It has to be performed in full knowledge by visualizing the absolute truth. And then he says, it is said the development of Krishna consciousness is exhibited by proportionate material detachment or vairagya. If one does not separate from material enjoyment, it is understood that he is not advancing in Krishna consciousness. So material enjoyment and Krishna consciousness doesn't go together. That's as Srila Prabhupada always explains, that renunciation in Krishna consciousness is so strong that it cannot be deviated by any attractive illusion. So that's why in the previous translation and purport, Srila Prabhupada stresses on this word serious devotional service. So there's a difference between just performing devotional service and actually doing it in a very authentic and serious way. Because even while performing devotional service, we see that how our mind is constantly being pulled by material distractions. So that's why we should practice renunciation to an extent, and that's why we practice austerities even in our spiritual life, like fasting during Ekadashi and other important days, and during Kartik we follow the vrata. So all these austerities will help us to be firmly situated in the platform of devotional service. Otherwise it's so easy for the mind to trick us and distract us away, even while we are actually engaged in devotional service. And that point again, Srila Prabhupada, explains here. One has to perform devotional service in full tapasya, austerity. One should fast on the 2 Ekadashi days, which falls on the 11th day of waxing and waning moon, and on birthdays of Lord Krishna, Rama, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There are many such fasting days. Yogena means by controlling the senses and mind. Yoga Indriya Samyama. Yogena implies that one is seriously absorbed in the self and is able, by the development of knowledge, to understand his constitutional position in relationship with the super self. In this way, one becomes fixed in devotional service, and his faith cannot be shaken by any material allurement. So we may think, oh, I'm chanting the holy names of the Lord is the best process to control the mind. Of course, that's the best process, but in order to aid our mind to be chanting purely and with attention, it's very important that we also practice these austerities. Because I always have people question that, why are you fasting on Lord Krishna's birthday? You should be like happy, you should be eating nicely. Why are you fasting? Why are you fasting yourself to why are you torturing yourself? But we understand, Srila Prabhupada explains, we are not doing that for any other reason but to actually control our mind and senses. And we also do it as an offering for Krishna. We want to express our love, and so we do that by fasting, and also it helps us to control our mind and senses. And that's the reason why there are so many restrictions that we follow. Okay. So did I cover all the points? Okay, we'll go to the next verse 23. The influence of material nature has covered the living entity, and thus it is as if the living entity were always in a blazing fire. But by the process of seriously discharging devotional service, this influence can be removed, just as wooden sticks which cause the fire are themselves consumed by it.
What day do we cover vices?
Today.
No, morning.
Evening. Yeah. So here the example is given how a fire is conserved in wooden sticks, and when circumstances are favorable, the fire is ignited. But the wooden sticks, which are the cause of the fire, are also consumed by the fire if it is properly dealt with. Similarly, the living entity's conditional life of material existence is due to his desire to lord it over the material nature, and due to his envy of the Supreme Lord. Thus, his main diseases are that he wants to be one with the Supreme Lord, and he wants to become the lord of the material nature. So, this disease is actually due to material contamination. So, by performing devotional service, this material contamination can also be consumed, because in devotional service, these two diseases, namely the desire to lord it over the material nature and the desire to become one with the Supreme Lord, are absent. Therefore, the cause of material existence is at once consumed by the careful discharge of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. So this is what Mother Devahuti wanted to know, right? So her first question was, how can the soul be liberated? And she still had further doubt that, how is it possible for the material, for the pure soul to be actually be separated from the material nature? Is it even possible? Because they seem to be attracted to each other, right? So for that, Kapila Muni is giving this example that even though it looks so attracted, they seem to be attracted to each other. By careful discharge of devotional service, all these these diseases of material contamination will actually be vanquished, will be removed. And again, we see that Prabhupada is giving this example of Arjuna. Arjuna was apparently a fighter, but when by his fighting, he satisfied the senses of Lord Krishna, he became a devotee. So, Thus, although the tendency for philosophical speculation exists, the material effects of fruitive activities and empiric speculation do not, because this activity is meant for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Again, the same point. Activity, whatever activities we do, if we do it, if it is meant for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then it actually gets consumed, which means it doesn't affect us. Those material activities doesn't affect us, doesn't bind us. We'll go to the next verse. Next verse, he says, by discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. So he says how, because Mother Devahuti wanted to know, because how is it possible for the pure soul to actually not, he's in the material world, but still, how can it be possible for the pure soul to be not bound by the modes of material nature? So for that, Kapila Muni is explaining here. By giving it up, by giving up this mentality of lording over the material nature, the living entity can become completely independent, which means he will not be bound by the modes of material nature and stands in his own glory. I really like this term, stands in his own glory. So Prabhupada explains, when one is actually situated in devotional service, that is his independent position. Less intelligent men cannot understand the position of the eternal servant of the Lord, because the word servant, generally, when it's used in the material world, it's a very degrading, status to be a servant. But to be the servant of the Lord is the greatest position. If one can understand this and can thus revive one's original nature of eternal servitorship of the Lord, one stands fully independent. So he says, it's so contrary to what we hear in the material world. He says by being the servant of Krishna, one actually becomes independent. Whereas, in the material world, it's totally opposite. When we are, when we are a servant in the material world, we're actually under somebody's control, right? We are not independent. But when one becomes the servant of the Supreme Lord, then he stands fully independent. A living entity's independence is lost by material contact. In the spiritual field, he has full independence, and therefore there is no question of becoming dependent upon the three modes of material nature. This position is attained by a devotee, and therefore he gives up the tendency for material enjoyment after seeing his faultiness. And then for the last part of the purport, Prabhupada explains, given an opportunity, Prabhupada will always explain, how an impersonalist, is acting, and, how a devotee should be acting. So he says the difference between a devotee and an impersonalist is that an impersonalist tries to become one with the Lord so that he can enjoy without impediment, whereas a devotee gives up the entire mentality of enjoying, and rather he engages in the transcendental service of the Lord, and that is his constitutional glorified position. In other words, transcendental pleasure derived from the loving service of the Lord is the actual independence. Next verse. Kapila Muni explains, in the dreaming state, one's consciousness is almost covered, and one sees many inauspicious things. But when he is awakened and fully conscious, such inauspicious things cannot bewilder him. So here, Prabhupada explains that how, sometimes, when we are sleeping and when, in dream we undergo some very unfavorable things, right? Which causes us disturbance and anxiety. But the moment we wake up and we know that it's only a dream, then we feel relief. So similarly, the position of self-realization or understanding of one's real relationship with the Supreme Lord makes one completely satisfied. So it's like this. So right now we are all in the, being this material condition, we are all in the state of, having a dream where we are, sometimes in advantageous position, sometimes in a disadvantageous position. But the moment we actually, raise our consciousness, we actually wake to the real consciousness, then we will be completely satisfied, because that's when we will know that I'm not this body, but I belong to Krishna. I have a relationship with Krishna, and he's my loving master, and I am his subordinate. So when we awaken to this real state, then one becomes relieved and satisfied and blissful. It says that is the difference between the dream state and wakefulness. The state of contaminated consciousness is compared to a dream consciousness, and Krishna consciousness is actually compared to the awakened stage of life. So again, Kapila Muni is now stressing the importance of understanding or awakening to the real consciousness, so that Mother Devahuti can be convinced that the only solution is to actually be Krishna conscious, to actually surrender to the Lord, to actually act in one's relationship as a servant of the Lord. Next verse. Verse 26. The influence of material nature cannot harm an enlightened soul, even though he engages in material activities, because he knows the truth of the Absolute and his mind is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here he says, a devotee whose mind is always fixed upon the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called Atmarama or Vidita Tattva. Atmarama means one who rejoices in the self, or one who enjoys in the spiritual atmosphere. So, when the individual soul and the super soul, they engage in reciprocation of service and benediction, then the living entity is said to be in the Atmarama position. The Atmarama position can be attained only by one who knows the truth as it is. The truth is that the Supreme Lord is the enjoyer and the living entities are meant for his service and enjoyment. One who knows this truth and one who tries to engage all resources in the service of the Lord, he escapes all material reactions and influence of the modes of material nature. And that's what he says, that the Lord says in the 7th chapter of the Gita also. He says one can easily surpass this this influence of material modes of material nature by surrendering unto me, right? Which is nothing but surrendering to the Lord means to actually act in a position of being a servant of the Lord. And Prabhupada gives a very nice example. He says, just as a materialist engages in constructing a big skyscraper, a devotee engages in constructing a big temple for Vishnu. Superficially, the skyscraper constructor and temple constructor are on the same level for both the collecting wood, stone, iron and other building materials. But the person who constructs a skyscraper is a materialist, and the person who constructs a temple of Vishnu is Atmarama. The materialist tries to satisfy himself in relation to his body by constructing a skyscraper, but the devotee tries to satisfy the super self, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by constructing the temple. Although both are engaged in the association of material activities, the devotee is liberated and the materialist is conditioned. This is because the devotee who is constructing the temple has his mind fixed upon the Supreme Lord, whereas the non-devotee has his mind fixed for his own sense gratification. Next verse 27. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. So this is the Sankhya process, right? That Kapila Muni is explaining. But whereas we who are practicing Bhakti Yoga, especially in this age of Kali, even though very degraded age, because of the benediction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we are in a very advantageous position. We have all the tools necessary to actually go back to Godhead in this very lifetime. But if we can really use this opportunity well, then just this one lifetime will be we can go back to the spiritual world. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, in the material existence, when a devotee is not completely purified, he expects material benefit from the Lord in the form of relief from material miseries, or he wants material gain, advancement in knowledge of the relationship between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity, or knowledge as to the real nature of the Supreme Lord. When a person is transcendental to these material benefits, or for understanding when a person is transcendental to these material conditions, he is called a pure devotee. He does not engage himself in the service of the Lord for any material benefit or for understanding of the Supreme Lord. His one interest is that he loves the Supreme Personality of Godhead and he spontaneously engages in satisfying him. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says, what is the highest example of pure devotional service to Krishna is that of the gopis in Vrindavan. He says they are not interested in even understanding Krishna, but only loving him. Because that's the, in the highest stage of pure devotional service, there is no, concept of, oh, I want to understand Krishna more. No, because they only want to love Krishna, and by through that reciprocation they actually understand Krishna more. So that platform of love is the pure state of devotional service. Unless one is advanced to this pure state of devotional service, there is a tendency to desire elevation to higher material position. And he says, a mixed devotee may desire to enjoy a comfortable life on another planet with a greater span of life, such as on Brahmaloka. These are material desires, but because a mixed devotee engages in the service of the Lord, ultimately after many, many lives of material enjoyment, he undoubtedly develops Krishna consciousness. So either we can, do it gradually, or we can take this one lifetime opportunity and, surrender completely. So if we take to the gradual process, then it will take many lifetimes, but undoubtedly we will come to that platform of Krishna consciousness. Whereas if we engage in serious devotional service in this very lifetime, then we can immediately go back to Godhead. Okay, we are almost coming to the end. So verse 28-29, he says, Kapila Muni explains, my devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited costless mercy, and thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses towards his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. This is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. Because what was Mother Devahuti's last question? Her doubt was, oh, even if I get freedom, what will happen if if I'm forced back to the bondage? So that was the last question, right? So for that, Kapila Muni is actually giving a very nice reassurance. He says, one who is actually self-realized, and attains the unlimited costless mercy of the Lord, once he goes back, he quits his material body and goes back to the spiritual world, he never comes back. So again, all the points in the purport are really nice. I'll just touch upon some of the important points. Devotional service is revealed to the pure devotees by the unlimited costless mercy of the Lord. This is especially spoken of here by the Lord, Mat Prasadena, by my special grace. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Only those who engage in devotional service with love and faith receive the necessary intelligence from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so that gradually and progressively they can advance to the abode of Personality of Godhead. Again, it's not our endeavor alone, but unless we have the costless mercy of the Lord, it is not possible to progress in to the platform of pure devotional service. So that's why there is always this reciprocation of love and benediction. We actually put our efforts to in Krishna consciousness, and the Lord actually reciprocates, and through this cycle of reciprocation and benediction, the devotee actually advances in Krishna consciousness. Another point that Srila Prabhupada makes, by the grace of the Lord, the self-realized devotee engaged in devotional service understands his destination even while in the material body. He therefore performs his devotional activity steadily without doubting, and after quitting his material body, he at once reaches the destination for which he has prepared himself. After reaching that abode, he never comes back to this material world. So we can be in a liberated state even before we quit this body to the performance of devotional. If we perform devotional activities steadily without doubting, then even while in this material world, we can be in a liberated state. And of course, after quitting the material body, one reaches the supreme abode and never comes back to the material world. So with this, Kapila Muni has answered all of Mother Devahuti's questions. The last verse he kind of summarizes. He says, when a perfect yogi's attention is no longer attracted to the byproducts of mystic powers, which are manifestations of external energy, his progress towards me becomes unlimited, and thus the power of death cannot overcome him. So basically, he gives another assurance that how death cannot, once situated in, once the pure soul goes back to the spiritual world, he cannot, be affected anymore, and the power of death cannot overcome the perfect yogi. And purport, again Prabhupada explains, how yogis are generally attracted to the byproducts of the mystic yogic power, for they can, they can become, usually, mystic yogis, most of the times they perform, meditation and all, the austerities, undergo austerities in order to gain some mystic yogic power, so that they can, walk on water, they can, become as light as air and all those things. But a perfect yogi's mind is not attracted by any material power, but is simply attracted by the unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. For a devotee, the process of merging into the Brahman effulgence is considered to be hellish, and yogic power, or the preliminary perfection of yogic power to be able to control the senses, is automatically achieved. So for a devotee, he does not even, care about, or he's not interested about merging into the Brahman, and by performing, all these, yoga process, he does not care for any perfection of yogic power, but all that he cares is to actually attain the Lord, to actually, attain the Lord in the position of being a servant. So, and by following this process of bhakti yoga, the devotee can, achieve all this, controlling the senses, purifying the senses, everything, similar to what a yogi does through this, the process of 8 process of yoga process. The same results can be attained by a bhakti yogi by just following the practices of devotion service. And Prabhupada says, as for elevation to higher planets, a devotee considers this to be simply hallucinatory. A devotee's attention is concentrated only upon the eternal loving service of the Lord, and therefore the power of death has no influence over him. In such a devotional state, a perfect yogi can attain the status of immortal knowledge and bliss. That's what we saw in, in the passing of Prahlad Maharaj, because he was completely taking shelter of the Lord, even when he was actually put into so many, different dangerous situations by his father. He was least disturbed, because he was like, if I'm living, I'm engaged in the service of the Lord. If I'm actually killed by my father, I'll still be engaged in the service of the Lord. So that was his consciousness. So that's why he was not fearful and anxious even when he was being tortured by his father. He was only completely taking shelter of he was not taking shelter of the Lord to protect him. That was his natural consciousness, and the Lord actually protected him, no matter what. So that's the unique position of a devotee. It's so beautiful. I mean, that's my realization from reading this chapter, was how bhakti yoga is a very simple, straightforward process, and especially for us, we have all the facilities to actually practice Krishna consciousness. There are no complaints. There's nothing lacking in order to practice bhakti yoga. So with this, I'm closing my presentation. Now we'll open to questions and comments.
So thank you very much, Vishakha Mataji, for a nice presentation. Very comprehensive overview, and you highlighted the important points. But before we go ahead with the question and answer session, last week itself I wanted to talk a little bit about, is that okay if we just spend few minutes that I talk about the upcoming thing. Now that we are completing 3 cantos by Krishna's mercy, I was thinking that we should have less rigorous academic stuff because we need to complete Nectar of Devotion, and so I was thinking, and Nectar of Devotion won't be as intensive as we are having with the Bhagavatam. That is like there will be no essays or exams. We just read through it. So we can meet and we can actually take the Nectar of Devotion and read the southern part. I mean, we can take turns in reading and we can complete the southern part with no exams and less pressure. So it will be like I think it will take few months to kind of get that done. In the meanwhile, we can complete our essays, or I have, from my perspective, grade the exams and grade the essays so far. I haven't been able to do that, so please forgive me for that. But before that, I just want to offer my obeisances to all of you for participating in the Bhakti Vaibhava and allowing me to serve you, even though I am a low-class person. I'm grateful that you gave me a chance to serve you. That's my good fortune. So we'll take about few months of break. We'll read Nectar of Devotion, and then probably we might do something with Tattva Sandarbha. I'm not sure, but at least get a grounding. I'll grade the essays. We'll go take the stock of how are we managing our timesheets in terms of how many hours did we put in. We have all that administrative stuff lined up. In case we didn't have that also, then we can see, okay, these are all the issues that we are facing and how we can do to overcome. Probably some might include on an administrative level, some might include on a personal level. So it will be more of a break kind of thing to to um, to pause to see how much we have accomplished actually, to read 3 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam that we have achieved together by grace of Krishna and grace of Guru and Gauranga. It's something. We should pat ourselves on the back once we have completed the 3 cantos. And this is what my proposal was, to take a 6-month break from Bhagavatam. We read the Nectar of Devotion. We complete all our essays. We make sure that everything is ready there in place. And the timesheets, we can also have an honest, open discussion on what the timesheet stuff is. Are we able to meet it realistically, or what needs to be done on that front? And then come back renewed for the 4th canto. If that is, if the devotees think that it is not a great idea, maybe we should still continue on with the 4th and 5th and 6th cantos. Then do the Nectar of Devotion. That's also possible, but it's something we can think about. Rasika Mataji, you had a comment?
Prabhu, no, I was asking, are you thinking about this break after we finish the 3rd canto?
Oh, absolutely. We complete the 3rd canto, we have our exams, we have our essays, and then we take a break for about 6 months. So, Vishaka Mataji, for example, might catch up with her essays, administrative stuff. Each of us see, okay, timesheets. What are we doing with the timesheets? Timesheets, are we having recording, not recording? Is there in one place? What is the 3-hour board of exam things happening? Unrealistic, realistic? What do we can come as a group to kind of say, okay, this is what is achievable, this is what is not. So what can we do about it? So at least it will give us, we can take a kind of a look back, review what all we have done, review where we are falling short, review what are the highlights, the lowlights, how we can improve for the next 3 cantos. And so that was the kind of thing. It is after the 3rd canto. There's till 3rd canto, we still have our essays, we have our exams, and we do everything like what we have been doing. So and it will give a time for me also to go through all the exams, say, okay, and on a personal level, I can talk to each of the devotees and say, okay, this is what your essays have been, or exams have been, or it's more of a formality, because all of you will pass. That's not a question here right now. But I was thinking it will be more of a retrospective period to see where we are and how we can move. So this is something you don't have to answer back right now, because we still have a few more sessions to go, and then we can kind of take a decision in the coming session. So I just wanted to put it out, and then we can go ahead. So because I have to leave in around 7 minutes, so sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I put it out before, so that the devotees can take time to see whether it's worth it or not, and then take it from there. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Vishaka Mati, you can go ahead for question and answers. I'll be here for 7 more minutes, 7 or 8 more minutes. My apologies because I have to attend to the other Bhakti Vaibhava class starting at 9. So.
Yeah, we understand, Prabhu. Okay. So, shall we start with Gandharvika Mataji? Maybe I will start with
Dandavat Mataji.
Mataji, 1 second. Shall I start
Thank
with
you.
Sri Gopal Prabhu? Because I think we
So,
may have.
can you hear me?
Are you okay, Prabhu? Sri Gopal Prabhu?
Haribol.
Haribol Mataji.
Haribol?
Yeah, Sri Gopal Prabhu, if you want to leave, do you want to go first or you're okay?
No, I think I already joined late, Mataji, so I will listen to the questions.
Okay.
At least
Okay.
I will have some idea. So I will stay. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah, Gandharvika Mataji, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. So nice to hear from you after a long time, Mataji.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed
I
the
also find
chapter.
it so good actually to exclusively sit and read.
No, such a nice chapter. I really enjoyed it. Specific
Yeah,
questions for now, Mataji. Thank you.
that's a great relief. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Govind Charan Prabhu?
No, but it was such a nice chapter, especially Prabhupada giving such practical tips of
Yeah.
that we could apply in our day-to-day life, especially on hearing. Thank you very much.
Yeah, actually, especially after listening to that, all the technical stuff, this is like, like a shower, rain shower, so it's nice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Govind Prabhu is there?
Vishaka Govincharan just stepped out. He told me that he didn't have any question, and we both were also thinking on the same lines that this chapter is so nice. It's like our basic philosophy, and Prabhupada is actually explaining each and every word of the translation, examples, and even
So
I
much of
was
reassurance, right?
it, and I was just thinking about one thing in verse 16. Prabhupada is saying about how the impersonalists think that the knower, the knowledge, and the noble, they're all one and the same. And he gives a very nice example, and he says even just by minute analysis we can know that it's not the same. And I was thinking we cannot do such minute analysis. Prabhupada has to do such minute analysis and explain it crystal clear to us so that we can understand. For us, it's still hard to, understand and interpret these things, right? And his purports are so nice for this chapter. Sometimes when we read some technical chapters, sometimes you have to look everywhere for what, they explain or what they mean. It was such a nice thing. And thank you for, explaining this so nicely. And I know that for others who don't know, like Vishaka didn't have any time this whole week because of, Vraja was not well. Yesterday, last night, she sat and prepared this whole thing. I even told her, leave PowerPoint, just present whatever you have understood and all, but she made an effort to do all this. Thank you, Vishaka, very much. You are inspiring to us.
Thank you, Rasika. But it's nice, to just sit with the Bhagavatam after a long time and read. So I really enjoyed doing that. Okay. Shri Gopal Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much. Actually, I joined very late, so I could get the glimpse of what you were saying, and it was so nice to hear. Even though in this material world, situated in this material world, still we can practice, the spiritual science, and then we can still do the devotional service and still be how we can do that still still in this material world. And one point you mentioned was I think in the purport, or you just said that because of the Lord Chaitanya's mercy, that we can, even in this lifetime, if you follow his instruction properly, it's possible to go back to Godhead you know, but otherwise it takes many years to, you know, go back.
Right. Right. Yeah, that is true, Prabhu. We are in a golden period, actually.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mataji. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Vedavit Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Thank you very much, Mataji. Very nice, wonderful presentation. Actually, you mentioned about some realizations, and yeah, it's very nice. I was actually looking for any questions. I could not find anything which is, you know, like philosophically required answer. Prabhupada, everything answered in the purports, and you actually cleared some of those. So yeah, only thing just I wanted to check what is your opinion on 7:27 2nd verse at the end. Prabhupada says devotees' actions, you know, may not appear very high quality to the common man, but devotee has no responsibility. So just because generally we say, you know, Vaishnava's behavior, you know, we should set an example with our behavior. So if it doesn't appear very high quality to the common man, how can we preach, or, you know, why devotee has no responsibility?
Okay.
Is what Prabhupada meant on that.
Okay, let me read that those few lines so that others also get the context. A conditioned soul may be very good and act in the mode of goodness, but still he is conditioned under the spell of material nature. A devotee, however, acts completely under the direction of the Supreme Lord. Thus, his actions may not appear to be of very high quality to the common man, but the devotee has no responsibility. Let's take the example of Arjuna Prabhu. Arjuna actually is, duty as a Kshatriya is to fight. But if you see, he actually, the Pandavas, especially Yudhishthira Maharaj, felt this. He was guilty that I was actually the cause for killing so many people, and he was not able to come out of it. You know that. We may see that, one way of thinking is it was Arjuna didn't want to fight because of his material emotions, but Krishna asked him to fight. So if you see from a perspective, outside perspective, it may see that why did Arjuna kill everybody, right? But it may not look, a devotee is supposed to be non-violent, not cause harm to others. But if you see that was the instruction of the Supreme Lord, so he acted even though it was not his will, because it was what Krishna wanted. He did it. So from a common man, it may not be appealing, but he did the right, action, and therefore he did not have any responsibility for killing those people. So similarly, in our cases, we may think that there are devotees who work so hard, right? For example, we may go for book distribution. Sometimes we may have to not go attend some of the events or parties. Even within the family, we give higher priority for for our Krishna conscious activities. So our for the common people, we'll think as if we are very fanatic, or they are not attending to their family. They're always doing going outside and distributing books, or doing other things. So they are not actually spending quality time with their children. They are not taking care of the family properly. But because we are doing it for spreading Krishna consciousness under the instruction of Srila Prabhupada and our spiritual master and acharyas, we don't actually get any reactions for it, or because we are engaging it for the Lord's service. The Lord actually takes care. Krishna says, I carry what you lack and I preserve what you have. So the Lord actually takes responsibility for us. Of course, we do not do it whimsically by just not taking care of the family and doing. We try to be responsible, balance both. But for a common man, it will be very it will appear as if we are not responsible. But because we are doing it for as a service to the Lord will actually take us off the responsibility of that. That's my understanding, Prabhu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mother. It's actually perfect examples you gave, which is
we are all going through it.
Yeah. Thank you, Vishaka. We were discussing the same point yesterday when we read this high quality thing. Many times we face this, right? Some of our friends or families, they think like, why, like even see when we read a description of a speaker, it says, right, he was in IIT, he left his IIT and then he joined the movement. he
Yeah.
had this job, then we glorify them. But then if somebody reads that, they think, why they would leave IIT and join a temple? Why they would lead a management consulting firm and leave?
Right.
Like they think it's silly or weird or foolish,
Mm.
because that's like the highest fame one can achieve in the material world. But then it sounds really weird because they don't know why they are doing and what is the background of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you
That's
for
a good
explaining.
example. Yeah.
Yes, Mother. Yeah.
Okay. So looks like we don't have many callers in today, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll yes, Prabhu.
Yeah. That's
And
all.
Yeah,
that's
Shiva
all.
Prabhu said Sukeshwari is not well, it seems.
Well, yeah, and I don't know. Govinda Prabhu, I think, tried to join, but then he
No,
left.
he was there and it seems like he left. I saw him some
Yeah.
time ago. He was there
Yeah.
now. Probably he's gone.
And yeah, my husband is not there because he's taking care of the baby. But yeah, I mean, we both read together, so he's covered.
Mataji, what about Rashka Mataji? So what about the time sheets? Anybody? I wanted to know how
I
everybody.
just sent a reminder because I noticed there was no entry for the last 2 months.
Yeah,
Like,
yes, Mata.
so I put, maybe people read but forgot to update. That's why I thought, actually I went to India for like 6 weeks. So for 2 months I didn't study, so I didn't put any entry. So
Yeah.
the last I checked, like last week, there was nobody in between. So just thought I should remind everyone, Prabhu. So if you had, spent time in between reading, you can always go back and put the date, because we can always put the whole date of when we studied, na? So
Yeah,
just,
yes, Mata.
so
Actually,
Shiva Prabhu might be checking that, and that's one of the things that he said this time, right, about our
yeah,
reading.
just wanted to know like how everybody is doing, because I'm also not able to do since 2 months. I was doing with Sukeshwari Mataji, and she was busy work and other things. We were not able to catch up on the from past 2 months. I think we were not reading. I asked Sri Govinda Prabhu whether he can partner with me, and for him also only Sunday after Bhakti Vaibhava class he said is fine. So I'm thinking what to do.
Or Prabhu, you do
Finding.
self-reading, if the peer thing is, or
Okay.
of course you can, Shiva's Prabhu, I'm saying, instead of not being able to find a partner, like
Yeah.
what we did is during last Thanksgiving weekend, we read like 3-4 chapters together.
Okay.
Because of last 6 weeks we didn't do, and we thought to do similar in December holidays. If you're not able to do on a weekly basis, at least cover somewhere. But the best thing is to do weekly. I realized otherwise it becomes so much pending and the assignments become pending.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Even for us, I think this semester is reading wise it's down.
You used to do with Sundar, right?
Yeah,
I remember.
we
No, they
still
are
do
still
once in a while. We still do once in a while, but this semester has been
very
very
consistent.
very down. And I told Sundar Prabhu, if there is a audit, Bhakti Vaibhava audit, we'll get caught.
But because of Sundar Prabhu and Sri Gopal Prabhu reading, now Advaita and Vrindavan have started reading too together. So that's
Very.
yeah.
So I
That's an
think we
additional
will. I
benefit.
think we've been talking. We've been talking. We should do this week, and it's just getting delayed
I
or
was
something. But I think we'll get back on track. I think we will get back on track.
Okay. I was having one suggestion that, see, this Sunday morning, somehow we force ourselves to attend this class, right? Because it's a class and becomes a mandatory thing. Whatever we have, we adjust. Maybe we should put that reading also as mandatory. But somehow it doesn't happen in the week. Like I sometimes feel only out of or force, I end up doing things. Even though we want to read Bhagavatam, other things come and the week goes away. So that was just my one suggestion I was thinking. If we put like 1 hour reading session, whatever day, I don't know, weekday evening or Saturday or whatever day, then somehow because it is there, we all will do it as a part of the class.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah,
it
that's
becomes
a very good point, but that's a very good point. I was getting frustrated, not getting. Then I said, Friday, no, it's Saturday afternoon, I'll just sit. And couple of times I did, 2-3 hours. I sat down, just read, But I was thinking, somehow that's a good point. Some allocated time we should set aside. So that
Maybe we should
whatever it
have
is,
this.
you're not gonna.
Huh? Prabhu?
No. Maybe we should have this kind of bhakti, like live in the live meeting. We can read like in the like class.
Yeah, let's ask everyone. I mean, I am fine with that because that will
Yeah.
force me to study on a weekly basis rather than on a
Mataji.
collecting.
Yeah. Because mandatory means it is, because if we only asks 2 people, that may not be mandatory.
And also it will give a good chance for me, to even to tell others, sorry, I cannot do this now because I have a bhakti fixed. Sunday morning 7:15 has to happen. Whatever it is, this call, that call
Yes,
doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll send an email, Prabhu, and ask everyone's consensus, and then we can see.
Yeah. Okay, Mataji. Thank you.
Panchakalpatarubhyascha.
Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Koti Vaishnava ki
Hare
jai.
Krishna.
Hari Hari Bol.
Hari Bol.